Welcome to the Author's Chaos podcast. Apparently it's season 2 now. Is that how we're starting?
Right now, sir. Oh, I'm gonna cry.
Immediately. You just thought, I'm making season 2. So we're in season 2.
This is episode 2 of season 2.
Look at
FYI. Look at us.
2 seasons. 6 seasons.
Oh. 6 seasons at a movie.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Not anything.
You made the executive. So Sarah made the executive decision when she was editing the podcast the other day that we were going to move into season 2, apparently.
Well,
which she's actually helped me break it up. Yeah, from May to February.
Can I just tell you that I could have broken it up in like August?
Why?
Because I can. Why not? You're not doing it. It's me.
Season 2. My brain was like, oh yeah, you go for like a certain amount of time. And Sarah's like, 11 months.
11 months. Yeah. Yeah.
Alright, so today apparently we are talking about the difference between plot and
theme. Overarching theme.
Yeah. Because we saw a video of a guy on TikTok the other day where he was talking about how to sell your book and how to promote your book to people. Because people often go, well, this is what my book's about, and then they'll explain the plot of the book. And he suggested that you explain the plot, but then you say, but my book is really about, and you explain the underlying theme.
Yeah.
And while we understand the point of that, it seems like it is hard to describe your theme without spoiling a big chunk of your book, I think is a big issue.
So one thing about, especially with EOA, since it's not released yet, that I'm having a hard time is in that vein of like, so my story's about this woman who finds out she's a curse breaker, right? That's the main gist of the story. But there's like underlying themes that come out throughout conversations and things that are happening in the book that if I talk about those, it's going to spoil later chapters. So, but in any story, and I think you can agree with this, there's always like that one main thing that's going on that's like your focal point. But then in the background, there's all these other like little plots going on. Like with Sai, he wakes up, has to figure out who he is because he has no idea. And then, but underneath of that, there is all this like dark stuff happening in the world that he is uncovering in his own journey. That I love that intertwining, and that's what I want to talk about is how we make that a thing, like how we intertwine those stories to where at the end they come up and it's like, oh, that makes a whole lot of sense.
How to drive meaning into your overall plot itself, I guess, is more the context. And I think that's what he's trying to get at is that the plot of your book, what happens in the story, is very important to sell to people. But people really love a good narrative theme, and if you can construct a theme and explain your theme in a way that people want to read it, that would be something that would help you sell your book, or help you get your book out to different publishers. And so when we talk about underlying theme, it's not the stuff that is on the surface. It is all the stuff that happens underneath and all that stuff that you put in as character development or what you're putting in without actually saying. It's more of that tell or show and not tell.
Right. So one thing like with stories like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, you have like the hero's journey, which is the main, like that's the main theme.
Yes.
But underneath of all of that, especially like in, we'll use the Harry Potter series, especially in that there's underlying themes of like inclusion for people who are different. And I know that J.K. Rowling's a
figure.
Tough
she's a person.
Figure. She's a person. She's a whole person. But like the story itself, in my opinion, when I read it the first time, was more about inclusion and not looking down on people who are other than you, right? Or different. And that was one thing that I really, really took from it. Or stories like, oh my gosh, at my brain. I know the story Katniss. I can't think of what.
Hunger
Games. There you go. So like the overall theme of that is this government has taken over and they're forcing these kids to go through this. But underneath all of that is also like all of this subterfuge and spying and like cunning things that are happening that are beautifully weaved into these stories and get you to the end where you're like, yes. Yeah. That is how that's supposed to go.
Well, I don't think the guy in his video, I don't think he's talking about explain your subtext to people, because you can't take how people are going to interpret your work and tell them how they're going to interpret your work.
Right.
A lot of drawing meaning and theme from a book comes from the observer, the person who is actually reading it, just like any form of art does. Because in my opinion, in Origins, a big undertone, a big theme there in my book is that life, regardless of how it comes about, regardless of how you feel about it, has meaning, and there is meaning in whatever life you're living. But that's never stated outright in the book. That's subtext. And he is... the guy is just trying to get you to think deeper, I think, about what your story is about, because so often we just want to read the blurb of our book to people and say, here's what it's about, when really he's saying, but what is the real underlying message you're trying to convey? What is the real underlying thing you're trying to say?
It wasn't until an alpha reader came to me and she's like, I love the growth of Cora over the whole book. And I'd never thought about it. I'd never thought about the story in that way. I'd always thought, like, this is Cora, like, stepping into her own, but, like, getting the job done, quote unquote. And when she was like, to watch her go from kind of uncomfortable in who she is and, like, not confident to at the end of the book where she's like, I am a weapon in the hands of Nightshade. She goes, that is a cool thing that, like, I don't talk about that when I'm talking about the blurb. I'm like, it has found family. It's got a cool pit bull. Like, there's just a bunch of stuff in it you're really going to like. But that subcontext is she does go from kind of insecure to I'm a weapon, like, which is crazy.
Yeah. And it's just, it's one of those things that you don't really get to tell people what they get out of your book. But I see what he's trying to say in saying that my book is really, the depth of it is down here.
Yeah.
And if you're looking for these certain themes, these certain things, that's what he's saying to sell to people. And I don't think it's that deep or thorough a message.
Right.
I think we know what we're trying to convey when we write certain things. I think we know the emotion we're trying to drive home and the point we're trying to drive home. It's just that when we go to explaining that to people, I think a lot of times we can be like, well, I don't want to just assume that they're gonna understand this. I don't want to put words in their mouth and make them think this is what you have to take out of it. And that's part of, you just have to be careful when you're trying to get people to read your book. Trying to draw your own depth out of it can be kind of odd.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
So that's why that advice was very, very strange to me. I understand he's trying to get people to think more deeply about writing.
Oh, yeah.
Because, like I said, often it's so hard.
It can also become very one-dimensional if you're not looking at it from how am I pushing this lower subplot. And I think with people who have either watched a lot of anime or watched a lot of storytelling in movies or even read lots of books, you pick up on that stuff even if you don't realize you're picking up on that. And it also helps when, like, you're a theater kid or something like that, because plays are predominantly, like, having to figure out what all of the contexts are for everything, right? And I think that as creatives, it's to weave that, to keep it from being one-dimensional, because that's very, if you're not thinking about it, your character does no underlying growth, they just go through this adventure, and people can't connect with that because you don't enter something as traumatic as a burning city and leave the same. Right? Like you just don't.
And I think that it's understanding how to write in subplot, understanding how to weave things in without just saying them outright is a pretty high level skill in writing. you would notice if you read 10-year-olds writing like I do.
Oh, right.
That they have a hard time throwing subplot in. They're like, okay, we go from point A to point B to point C to point D. And they don't have character development or anything in between there to make it fleshed out and make that subplot make sense. It makes the stories less fun to read. It makes them less interactive.
It's very one-dimensional.
And I think all good writers have subplot activities in their book. They understand that there are messages that they are trying to convey. But you need to have an understanding of that for yourself in a way that you can convey it to people. And that's all he's trying to say.
Oh, right.
Is that you need to really understand what your book is about before you start trying to sell it to other people.
Oh, 100%.
That's the whole thing. And that's so hard to do because writing a blurb on your own, telling what your story is about after you spent 90,000 words writing it down, is so difficult. So I definitely think that, getting it down and then talking with people and saying, okay, what did you pull from this? Or what am I really trying to say here? And getting that in your own words, I think that's a big challenge that people face.
So when you were writing Odyssea, like, did you run into subplot stuff that you had to thicken up or beef up in order to make the story continue to flow?
So as I'm going through now and doing edits, I'm noticing I'm leaning a lot more into the subplot stuff because a lot of times when you write your first draft, it's A, B, C, D. You try to get to the story beats, and you may need to flesh stuff out as you go.
Right.
But a big subplot in that book is accepting who you are, regardless of what you've been taught.
Right.
And so I'm having to go through and make sure that I'm showing and not telling constantly in it because my brain always wants to go dialogue, here's what's going on, or exposition. And I'm like, no, it needs to be this. You need to let the person think and let them try and fill the pieces in on their own.
For sure.
So yes, I think that I have to go through and check the subplot to make sure it's there. But again, after finishing the first draft, I'm going through and seeing it. And I'm sure you saw that with Execration of Autumn as well.
Well, and I've read Execration of Autumn enough to hate it at this point, right? And I just, little caveat there, it is okay if you've read your own work 4 billion times and you hate it.
Right.
Like, that's okay. Like, I love, it's a love-hate relationship. Like, I'm really excited to get it out there. I'm really excited for people to read it, but I also hate the fact that I'm having to go back through it. But there were things where it got pointed out to me that because I see it all in my head, I show a lot, but I don't tell what's happening. Like they're wringing their hands or they're messing with their hair or stuff that, like, emotions we show with body language. I am not conveying that, so it feels like they're two-dimensional characters on a sheet when I could throw in he ran his hands nervously through his hair after a dialogue. And that'll thicken that up too, and
changes the meaning of the sentence.
It's exactly what he said, and it's better than me saying he sighed or he took a shuddered breath. This is what he said. He ran his hands nervously through his hair. Like, that's physical nervousness coming out.
Yeah.
Where I was just having a lot of he said, she said, he said, she said.
Yeah, and it feels like we're moving more in the way of talking about show don't tell here, but that's all about subplot. You don't 100%. You don't want to sit and act like your reader's the dumbest person on the planet.
For sure.
And they can't make heads or tails of what they're saying.
Right.
Readers like to be challenged. They like to think about stuff, but they also don't want to be confused. It's a fine line.
Like, it's a tightrope.
Yeah.
And you can lean too far one way.
And being able to know what your story is about, being able to know what the underlying sub-theme is, will help you to keep that narrative tied and to help to keep that stuff tied down. That's the whole point of defining your subplot, so you know that really at the end of the day, if nothing else comes across, this is what you're trying to convey.
Oh, for sure.
And that's exactly what he's saying, I think. I mean, I don't think there's any ifs, ands, or buts about it. That has to be what he's saying.
I also think as indie authors, we hear a lot of advice. People want to give a lot of advice. And when I watched the video the first time, I had to make myself watch it a second time because there was a part of me that was like, yeah, this isn't for me. And so I watched it a second time, and then I watched it a third time, and I was finally like, okay, wait a second. Like, this is, I get what he's saying. Maybe it's not geared towards someone in my sect of the writing world, right? Maybe it's not geared toward that, but like, I can take what he's saying and I can put that to use in my own story of like, I have this plot, but this is what's actually going on through the entirety of the story.
Yeah.
And this is the end goal overarching the entire series.
Yeah.
Because that is also a thing, right?
Yeah.
Because not only do you have individual books with your plot and your subplots, but you also have those subplots that span multiple books. And you are in that boat right now where you're having to take that spanning, overarching subplot and making sure that it's weaving through in a way that it makes sense to continue reading the books. The Kane Chronicles does that. Percy Jackson and the Olympians does that really well, where you have those little kernels of things that just travel through. And by the end, you're like, I remember that from the first book. I remember. So I think that as writers, we if we're not paying attention, we can lose that continuity. We can lose that personality within that overarching subplot. And I know I keep throwing overarching, but like, that's what it is. Like, it starts on that very first page and it will end on the very last page. Wheel of Time has 14 books. There is an overarching subplot, right? But there's an overarching subplot that's happening for them to complete. Just like the, I think it's the Starbringer series that Dad really likes.
Yeah.
That has 12 books in it. Like, there's an overarching plot. And as writers, we can hone our skills to like make those subplots better.
I agree. It ends up coming down to the fact, do you understand what you're actually writing? Do you understand why you're writing what you're writing? It's all fine and good to tell a story with no plot, with no underlying theme. There are stories out there that are just fluffy fun. There's not, an underlying lesson.
Right. And there is a place for those books.
Yeah. But being able to understand that alone is also a theme. You need to be able to say, this is just kind of a fluffy, cozy thing. This
is 60,000 words. Enjoy it.
Right. It's not going to have this deep-rooted thing. But most stories require there to be some lesson learned, require there to be some kind of plot to follow through, some kind of theme that people want to latch onto. And that's all I think he's getting at. That's all I think we're getting at, is that if you want your story to sell, you want people to want to read your story, you have to sit and understand why you wrote what you wrote and understand the meaning behind the things you're putting down, not just the face value.
100%. We last episode, I think it was last episode, you talked about how we were a storytelling people prior to having written language and all of that. And I think with all of the technology we have now, I'm seeing a lot more people who are like stepping back into that storytelling mode of themselves and being able to put their words on pages.
Even in the shortest form content.
But even in the storytelling people, like as a whole, the stories that were told back then were stories of heroes and monsters and reasons why you didn't make certain decisions or deals with the devil or with Zeus or Hades or whoever, right? Like they always had that. They've had a deeper meaning than just this is Persephone and Hades.
They always have some underlying lesson. And I mean, you can go all the way back to Greek stories of fables and the Odyssey and things like that. They have underlying themes.
Well, you can go back to Hebrew text for fables.
Are absolutely necessary to get that information across. And I think that we have always tried to find a way to convey what we mean in a way that is relatable to people. Because it's really, really, really easy to just say outright, this is what I think you should do. but you can play a lot more on emotions and things to get people interested in what you're saying through telling
Right.
of a story.
Right.
And so theme has a lot of reasons for existing. It has a lot of reasons for being around. And I think that you just need to understand what your theme is and understand how you're going to convey that in a way that makes sense.
Oh, for sure. And if you have any questions and you're confused about what your theme is, reach out. Like we may not be experts, but we will definitely help you try to find it, or we will find someone who can help you figure out what your theme is and what points you have to hit. Now, I know that there are quote unquote hard rules for certain genres. One that I keep seeing online all the time is that it can't be romance unless there's a happily ever after. And while I understand
Romeo and Juliet is
not a happily ever after. So I always fall back on like there are some rules, quote unquote rules to this. But for the most part, like, write your story. If you send it out to alphas and they're like, hey, I'm just not connecting with this character, maybe that's the chance you have to go back and say, okay, wait a second. Do I have that thing woven in that's making the character grow, that's making someone be like, oh, I've been that mad before, or oh, I've been in that situation where I'm confused and don't know which decision to make. Like, that is your point. Like, that's the point where you can stop and you can not tear yourself down and be like, I'm the worst author on the planet. But like, stop yourself and go, okay, how can I make this character more relatable? How can I make this story have a little bit more depth without throwing them off in the 12-foot section immediately?
I don't think there's a whole lot more to say on it than that.
Not really.
If you had seen that video floating around, I don't even know who the
creator
person was that put it out there, but
he's not wrong.
He's not wrong. Just think deeply about what your story is about and what you're trying to convey. That will help you become a better writer. That will help you to sell your stuff better when people ask you inevitably, 100%. What is your story about? Yeah. And you go, so it's very good. I mean, I think that's it. So I am D.L. Golden. I have a book called Origins Redux. It is out on Amazon right now. I'm working on Odysseia, about 9 chapters into its edits, so we should be getting closer to beta readers coming up. So, who are you?
I'm SF Rogers. I have a book named Execration of Autumn. We lovingly call it EOA. ARCs go out March the 16th, which is 2 Fridays.
Yeah.
Holy mackerel. And then the book releases April the 26th. I have my first book signing event the first weekend in May. Dana will be there, so will our sister C. Britt, and then our sister-in-law, Yoren's aspiring middle author, will be there as well. So we're super excited for all of that. Next week is Planet Con, so we will not have an episode. We will be in Kansas City, causing mischief, taking lots of pictures.
If you're there and you see me.
If you're at Planet Con and you see us, say hi. I'll be there on Sunday. I won't be there all weekend, but I will be there Sunday. So we are so excited you guys have joined us. Thank you for joining us for episode 2 of season 2.
Dear Lord. Bye.
Bye.